Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wholehearted Loving. I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Georgianna.
Today, we are going to be talking about busyness. What takes up our time and energy, and how can we bring some attention and shifts to that feel better for our lives? But before we do that, we're going to take a moment to connect with ourselves before we connect with each other and this podcast. G, have you got an exercise for us?
Yes, since we're talking about rest, I'm going to walk you through a practice that feels very restful for me. So you can try it out and see if it does the same for you, or maybe you have a different experience with it. So you can do this standing or sitting. I'm sitting, so I'm going to do it from a sitting place. Just feel your butt on what you're sitting on, feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breath. We're going to use our hands for this one. And we're going to go with like right hand, left hand. So I don't know if like people need to put up the L's, so you know which one is your right hand or your left hand. Did you ever learn that rule? What is the rule?
Oh, yes.
What is it? Do you know?
The one that is in the L shape is the left.
The one that is in the L shape is left. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, you're going to take your right hand and place it under your left arm. And then you'll take your left hand and place it either on the right shoulder or on the side of the arm. And I always ask people to try both and to see which one feels better. So your left hand is on your right shoulder or on your right arm. And just notice how that feels to give yourself a gentle holding. Notice what happens to your breath. And then the next part of this is to let your head and neck hang. And automatically what I do is I close my eyes, but you can notice what feels good for you. And this position is a reminder for our bodies, our nervous systems, that it's okay to rest right now. And we're resting in a very intentional and preventative way. We're not doing anything. We're not pushing hard. We're just sitting, chatting. But we're going to bring a moment of rest into our day. And just be here for, I like to say, 3 full cycles of breath. 3 inhales and exhales. And after your 3, you can check in to see if your body wants 3 more or if it feels complete to leave it here. When I come out of this one, I like to give myself squeezes on my arms. And just notice in what way did this holding symbolize rest for you?
I find myself doing this a lot. The self-holding, I think, is probably among the many, many countless things I used to sneer at and turn my nose up at. And it's so soothing. It's so comforting. It's so, it makes me more competent and able, day to day.
Yeah. I love how we are different in that way, because I think I'm like, yes, give me all the soothing tools. They make sense to me. Let's do them. And I love that you're this honest with us, that you're like, I would have sneered at them. I did sneer at them. I think they're ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't need soothing. Fuck you, soothing. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter which end of the spectrum you find yourself on, they will probably change your life in big ways.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you for that entree. So you sent me this quote that was posted by somebody on Instagram. It's a quote from Alex Pang. This is, I think, a very familiar and universal concept that we don't put much conscious attention toward, because busyness and, popularity and doing things and being places and seeing and doing and being seen are all very highly valued socially. Um, the pneumonia that ensues, not so valued, but we don't do much to avoid that because we got to keep busy. So the quote is, if you want rest, you have to take it. You have to resist the lure of busyness. Make time for rest, take it seriously, and protect it from a world that is intent on stealing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I learned an interesting fact the other day. Coffee breaks were a marketing scheme designed to get people to work more. So, we didn't used to have tea and coffee. We used to just drink beer all the time because that helped with cholera and things like that. So things were slower and maybe less steady up until, I'm bad with remembering names and numbers, but something like somewhere in the 1800s. Um, and then there came the time when all the men went off to war and the women started doing their jobs. And in the case of this tie manufacturer, a fancy tie manufacturer, they started employing women. And they found that the women had a slower, or a shorter rather, time frame in which to work. They did a much better job than the men did, but they crapped out after about 4 hours. So the boss of this company got the women together and said, how can we help you work longer hours? And they said, give us coffee. And so originated the coffee break. So entirely designed to keep you busy longer. And it's funny and ironic, I think, that labor activists today would be making demands for their breaks, and the coffee break is entirely designed to get more out of you as a cog in the machine.
That's why, like, I think when I lived in the Netherlands, I mean, the Dutch had this way of like, you work your 8 hours and you get out of there, and people would look at you funny if you were there past 5 o'clock.
Mm.
What are you doing here? Don't you have a life? Don't you have people who you care about? Why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
And, at the time, I don't know where things are at now, but I think it was in France where they talk about shortening their work week, giving more vacation hours. And I think they've done research that people actually are much more productive working
Yeah.
shorter amounts of time, fewer days in the week. They're happier, they're more loyal, they're more productive.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's, I don't know. It's funny to me how we think that longer hours at work is better.
Mm-hmm. And there are cases in which it is true, and like true to the person, especially entrepreneurs, which, like, who isn't an entrepreneur these days? But if I'm working a 16-hour day on something I feel incredibly passionate and compelled to do, it's not work, it's
Mhm.
something else, creation, something that takes
Right.
energy in a different generative way.
Well, I think generative is the thing, is that I don't think most people working for someone are in a position where they feel like, even if it's their 8 hour day, that it's generative for them in terms of joy and delight and energy. Right. And that's
Yeah.
the sad thing. Yeah. If you're an entrepreneur and it's your own thing, you want to work 16 hours a day, great. I also hope that that's not sustainable, in terms of health and wellness. But I think it's very different. And I've always felt very fortunate once I did my career switch, because the old one was killing my soul. Um, that, like, thank God I get to wake up every day and do something I love. Like,
Mm.
I remember someone asking me, like, "Are you excited for, like, vacation? It's summer soon." I was like, "Yeah, I'm sort of indifferent." Like, "Sure." And I think it was because of two things. One, because I love what I do. Like, I changed my life so that I could do what I love, and so my work doesn't feel like work. And two, because I take more breaks, like actual breaks, like breaks from my work to like do other things, and I don't push as hard. And so I don't feel like I'm living for the next vacation. Like vacation
Mhm.
just feels delightful because I get to do other things that I enjoy. But I'm not like, oh my God, like it's Friday. Thank God it's Friday. Or like how awful that it's a Monday, or like counting down the days till my next vacation. And I think it's because I like revamped my life and the way I look at pushing myself to like no
Mhm.
longer live that way, that I'm not living for the next vacation.
Yeah. It's funny when you and I have anything to schedule, you'll start looking through your day timer. And depending on how busy you are, you'll start doing some deep breathing. And you'll start naming the times where there's little slots of time. And I think I pretty often am like, don't you think you'll need a break, like between this thing and that thing? Or like, you're just back from this or that. Like, don't you think maybe you should schedule a day in between before we launch back into the thing, you know?
Yes, and you've been so good for me at learning to shift out of that. So I'm like, yeah,
Mm,
I am a, I don't know if you call it slow learner. I'm an experiential learner. So meaning I need to feel maybe how yucky it feels to be like,
mm,
that's that thing. Right. Cause so what I've noticed is like I'll have this ambitious, like, oh, there's a gap here. Let's fill that with that task. That's a little bit of, I think, how I'm wired, a little bit of how I was conditioned. Like, don't waste any blank spots in your calendar because then you would be considered lazy or unproductive. And, but what I've started to notice more is when I mentally think, oh, there's blank space there. I'll do this task. I'll do these 3 tasks. When that day comes, there's like nothing in me that wants to do that task, like none. And before that wouldn't even be a question. It wouldn't have been a noticing. It wouldn't have been a question. I just would have done it. And that's
yeah.
it. Moved on to the next thing. But now I'm like, gosh, what is wrong with me? Am I a lazy ass? But I know I'm not. I'm like, no, you're just tired,
Yeah.
right? You need a break. And now you know that after this, you need this much time to restore and have nothing on the agenda. And whatever does get done, if you feel the inspiration for it, if you feel you have the capacity for it, is great and is a bonus. But like, stop
Hmm.
anticipating that you're going to get this done. It's not going to get done. And
Yeah.
that's sort of how I've had to learn to like restructure my calendar and how I do things. And I remember
Hmm.
one specific day where we were about to maybe go on our week-long trip, and I was driving to your house first, and then I don't know, we were going to go from there. Or actually, maybe we weren't leaving that day. I don't know. I was coming over to your place. And my old way was like, oh my God, I got to hurry. I got to hurry. I'm going to be late. She's going to be annoyed. I didn't think that specifically about you, but just about people, people who are expecting me. And I think I even texted you like, oh, I'm running a bit behind. And you're like, no worries. It doesn't matter. You'll get here when you get here and it will be great. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Like, don't we have to like be on a schedule and be on time? And I remember you saying to me, I just want you to feel relaxed. I want you to like feel flow and feel that you can just let go and let down. And I'm like, you do? That's an option? What?
Oh.
Like, so even
Yes, for the first day of your vacation.
thought that you had to hustle and like, be all stressed out. I didn't know vacation without first being really stressed out.
Right? This is so typical. People who get back from vacation and they need a vacation from their vacation, like we have absolutely lost sight of what the hell we're doing. We've got more access to resources, more agricultural and technological things to make our lives easier, and yet we're still running in this ridiculous hamster wheel of needless hurry. And like on whose schedule, on whose timeline? What Shalina was really helpful with this for me. I remember she told me once just that she had a burst of creativity, so she stayed up all night writing, and I was like, you can do that? Like, but you're supposed to sleep at night. What did you do then? She's like, well, I kind of napped maybe the next day, or like, it just blew my mind wide open that if I had a burst of creativity, if that's what my energy felt like it was for, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And when the energy time came to rest, I could also do that. And it didn't have to fit somebody else's schedule or some social norm of what was appropriate. I could just actually do what felt good for me. And I
Mm-hmm.
experimented with that at length and have a completely different life now. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
just amazing.
Yeah, and I think it wouldn't have been for me a burst, well, maybe a burst of creativity, but most likely it was like a deadline I had to meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd be up working late. And lucky for me, the work I do excites me. So there is a part of like joy in it. But like, I would not be changing up what I expected of myself the next day. I would not be napping. That's for sure. I would not be in tune with my body. I might say, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, which is just conditioning to like blurt those words out of my mouth. But and even if I said them, I wouldn't do anything about it to help my body. I would just do the rote thing that I'm meant to
Just
do the
keep
next
going.
day. And then the
Yeah.
next day after that. And like there would never be this accounting for, well, you missed out on one night's sleep. So let's rejig some things to catch
Yeah.
up. It's like,
The accounting comes with the pneumonia that you get in 3 weeks because you've been going forever.
and then
Nature
also
will take over.
then we let ourselves rest. And sometimes we even fight against that. Like, oh, I'm not dying. So like I can still work a bit. Right.
Yeah.
So you said something before, I think we popped on this recording of like preventative rest. Like, what the hell is that? Like, that
Yeah.
would never have occurred to me. What do
Right?
you mean? It's just
Yeah.
go, full on go, or exhaustion shutdown. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
So, what is preventative rest to you, and how did it come about in your
How
life?
did it come about? Well, I also didn't think I needed it, but I also spent a lot of my life feeling ill or having psychosomatic physical responses that actually like took me out completely. So for me, I also spent a year. There's a lot of things I've spent a year like exploring for myself. And one of them was sleeping whenever I felt tired. And this is a super crazy one. It's really hard to get, or it was hard for me to get my head around because it seems very clear to me like there's systems in the body that are built around sleep. There's, the sun and the moon. Like there's a lot indicating that you should be sleeping at certain times, right? And the idea of sleeping until I wanted to, like I grew up being woken up when you're supposed to get up. And now that my mom's read all this stuff about sleep stuff, like she's apologized. She feels guilty that she deprived me of sleep at some formative time in my life. But so I think I did actually for a month this sleep whenever you want to thing. And what I realized, this I think also coincided with some isolation retreats. And what I realized was that if I have 3 days of rest a week, everything in my life is different. And I think of things a lot of the time in these terms of creativity and like when I'll feel inspired, and that can be creative, like generative energy, or actually creating a tangible thing. Um, but those sparks of energy, which really provide purpose and direction in my life, are not present unless I have that amount of rest and sometimes isolation. And I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't able to encounter that until I did this sleep whenever you want to, see what happens kind of thing. Um, so preventative rest now for me is it's often provided actually externally by the universe, I've noticed, or this is what I experience. There will be natural downtimes. And it used to be that in those downtimes, I would either feel inadequate or ashamed or like I should be doing more or frantically generating some kind of not really true busyness. And then when actual busy times in life came, I was all depleted and exhausted already because I hadn't taken advantage of that downtime to just sit around doing nothing. I'm putting that in air quotes because we often talk about rest as doing nothing, when in fact we're replenishing our reserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love for us to change that languaging. Imagine if every time we thought we were doing nothing, if we replaced that with, I'm replenishing right now.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm building up for whatever will come next. And whose voice is in your head? I'm going to say when you have those conversations with yourself, what words come up in the back of your mind? I'm taking preventative rest. For me,
There's no
as
one in my family who would have said that.
right? No, no, no. When you say that to yourself, what's the response that your shadow mind produces, right? For me, it's my mother clapping quickly behind me, faster, faster, do something. What do you mean you're doing nothing?
Yeah, totally. It would be my dad. Bless him. Um, he would be like, I don't know, some version of like, don't be so lazy, wasting your time. You know how much you could get done in 20 minutes, in half an hour, in one day if you really focused. Right. And my dad's very, very productive and like can
Mm,
do amazing things. Um, and I learned how to work hard through watching him. I certainly did not learn how to rest through watching him.
yeah.
Yeah.
The same way I feel like each of us has a special role to play in the symphony of life, I feel that way largely about human energy and its various expenditures. So there are people who I think are built to go, 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 the way
Mhm.
that your dad is describing. And for me, I can force anything. I'm a force in myself. I can focus my energy on anything. I can make anything happen. And the amount of flow and ease and universal support that will arise if I'm doing those activities when my energy actually feels like it's for those things instead of
Mhm.
it being contrived and forced,
Yeah.
everything is a million times better.
Yeah, I like that. Like knowing yourself enough to like follow that energy. Like talking about my dad, what I realized made me laugh actually internally. My dad, I always thought, like, I just had this revelation right now. I always thought, like, my dad was like a don't be lazy, push hard, be productive. And he was like, or that's what I gathered from his teachings and watching him. But if I actually really think about it, my dad is also the most disciplined man I know when it comes to his Tai Chi and his martial arts and his like stretching every morning, rain, shine, snow. He's outside doing his Tai Chi in the morning before really anything else happens in his life. And this is for as long as I've been alive and probably prior to that. And that's what's interesting because I don't think I ever saw that as a combo. Like this man like works super hard, but he also has preventative restorative time. But it just didn't look like that to me because I didn't
Right.
realize, the power that that gave him, that meditative time, that conscious breath, conscious movement every single morning. I just thought he was doing something
Hmm.
dumb, weird. Um, so I think that's actually why he's probably more balanced than I realized because he does have the work hard and he does have the rest, but his rest wasn't really like let me sit and do nothing.
Right.
And whereas I watched my mom, so I picked up the work and work and work from both my parents. And then I think I picked up the mom would only rest at pure exhaustion, if that ever.
Right. Yeah.
Mom would work till the middle of the night if she had to like make sure the kitchen was tidy.
Right.
She'd be up at the crack of dawn, vacuuming, make sure the house was clean. Like I never really watched her have anything like rest or preventative rest. I don't even know what that would look like.
Right. So then it's like you were sort of conditioned with these extremes, either like a sort of a perfect balance, like your dad's got going on, or the extreme opposite of no balance at all, and rest comes when health crisis happens,
Yeah,
or
and
you literally can't keep your eyes open.
call that like rest comes when health crisis happens, but I don't even want to call that rest. Like that's like exhaustion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And collapse. And it took me a long time to actually realize I lived like that, luckily without health issues, but that my rest, my sleep, even every night, it wasn't restful sleep. It was, I would
Mm.
push, I would stay awake until pure exhaustion and then fall asleep because I
Yeah.
didn't know how to regulate my system to like fall into rest because all I knew was how to run adrenaline and cortisol all day long, all through like
Yeah.
all until like collapse at the end of the night, right? Or collapse on the weekend. And
Yeah.
I've really had to practice bringing in these tools that help me be present, help me regulate throughout the day, help me be able to follow like what does my body need right now. I've napped more in the last couple of years than I ever have like cumulatively in my whole life.
Mm.
And like there was a period of time I napped a lot, I think in university, but it was interesting because I remember why I napped then. I napped because life felt overwhelming. And I
Mm.
recognized that when I nap, I don't feel overwhelmed. And so it was
Mm.
this like escapism. No,
Right.
it wasn't this, my body feels a bit tired now. Let's go have a nap before exhaustion.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's interesting that your body would let you fall asleep. I'm thinking of the example you just gave of staying up to the point of exhaustion. How many of us are running from our thoughts or our anxieties, and we run, busy, 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 busy. Then we get to bedtime, and then our anxious thoughts catch up to us. And so we keep ourselves busy in whatever restful way, like scrolling or some mindless thing, until our bodies take us off to dreamland. And these tools that we're talking about are the self-regulating tools that can manage those thoughts, which is just so important.
Mhm.
I'm a pretty anxious person. Like I suffer quite a bit from anxiety, and using the simple tools that we teach makes this manageable.
Mhm.
Um, in ways that I want everybody to have access to. I don't want to think that everybody is running on somebody else's timeline or because they're afraid to catch up with themselves, you know?
Mm. Yeah, and I wouldn't describe myself as someone who runs anxiety, but I would describe myself as someone who my brain is like can just jump from place to place and it's very fast and it doesn't bother me, but it's busy if I do
Mm-hmm.
nothing about it. And what's really neat for me is using these tools helps me slow things down, helps me be able to not be going, 100 miles an hour in my head. And
Yeah,
thank like I'm so thankful for that. I can't imagine putting my head down on the pillow at the end of the night and like running a gazillion thoughts, which I think my brain is capable of doing. But I think because I practice the tools throughout the day, um, it helps me not be running like that at
that's
bedtime.
great. Yeah.
Mhm.
Something that makes me feel really anxious is very busy and very harried seeming people. Like there's people who can have very packed schedules, but they feel spacious, present, not hurried. And then there's people who are frantically ripping out their hair and sort of quasi bragging about how busy they are at the same time. And that's, generally speaking, a choice, the
Mhm.
way we approach these things. I used to know this executive who would schedule for every meeting that she would schedule a half hour afterward to take care of all the to-dos. And
Mhm.
this is not a harried person at all. And it can be just that simple, giving yourself a bit of time, a bit of rest, knowing yourself well enough to know what you need in order to make X, Y, or Z feel good or feel spacious or slow down.
Yeah. Buffer time, in between time. Yeah, I definitely schedule that. I never knew about that. Never scheduled my life like that before. But I've been practicing that. I think I've always been a busy person. Like there's a lot in my life. I used to be, I wouldn't call it frantic, but it would be like there'd be an energy to it.
Mm.
And I think I would feel overwhelmed by that energy, but it also felt normal to me until one day I was like, I don't have to feel like this all the time. And I would tell myself, well, let's practice. Because I'm very similar to you. Like you said, you practice this thing for a month, you practice this for a year. I also really like to say, this is the thing I'm practicing for right now, because this is challenging for me. And I'm curious what will happen if I practice it. And so I practiced saying to myself in the morning when I would be like feeling really like overwhelmed and harried and rushed. I think I would always feel rushed. That's maybe what it was. And I would tell myself, I'd feel my feet on the ground. I'd say, and sometimes I'd put a hand on my body and I'd say, there are many things to do right now, and I don't have to feel overwhelmed. I can like do focus on one thing at a time and it will still get done. Like that's what I didn't realize is like the rushed energy that I brought to it just made everything more frantic so that I couldn't really think straight. But if I just slowed things down and focused on the thing that I'm doing, it always ended up being okay. Like think we would get to places on time, but the new way let me enjoy the process and also get to the place on time or get the thing done feeling quite peaceful.
Mm.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that peaceful was an option. I just thought that rushed and overwhelmed was the standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big element of choice there. And I do want to say that I think you and I are speaking from places of relative privilege here. Um, there are people who are going to be operating on somebody else's harried timeline, and
Mhm.
that harried person will have their own. I'm thinking of your manager who wants you to do a bunch of things that there's not humanly possible that all these things could be done, and that's because they're being pressured by their supervisor who's given them an impossible list of tasks. And there will be these situations which feel impossible, and the only solution for feeling a little better in those moments is bringing this presence that you're describing to the one thing that you're doing in that moment.
And like, I have much more flexibility now in that I don't really run on anyone's schedule. I mean, I have to bring my kids to their places, school and sports on a schedule, but for decades, I had a boss, and I had to be somewhere at a certain time and get things done on a timeline. So I know what that feels like to be on someone else's timeline. And I felt that if I bring this presence and if I remind myself, I don't have to feel overwhelmed right now. The way I'm talking to myself, the speed at which I'm throwing things into my bag, the way I'm like running through the house, all of those actions create an energy and create an energetic experience of rushed and overwhelmed. Like if I practice like placing one thing into my bag at a time, I'm just going to feel different. The
Yeah.
things will still all get into my bag, right? So that's what's really interesting. I've
When you
noticed.
bring such a different energy to the space that you're in as well and the people who are around you, that's a
Mhm,
gift.
for sure, and that impacts then their energy, right? I do remember priding myself for many years, thinking I can be ready in like 10 minutes. Like I wouldn't even have to give myself 30 minutes before to get ready for work. I'm like, I know how to have a 2-minute shower. I know how to be dressed and have my makeup done and like be out the door with my briefcase, like dressed to the nines in the office at this time. And I like prided myself on that. And then as life shifted and I was like, man, like I don't want to like push that hard. And then one day I got ready at like a pace that actually felt like natural and felt good. I was like, shit, it takes me an hour to get ready. And now, like, if I really could have every day the way I really wanted to, and I could, I would just have to adjust my sleeping and my waking schedule. But I would love to have like 3 hours to myself in the morning. That's just
Mm.
totally mine to like just sort of do my thing at my own pace. And I've started to adjust that a little bit. I know I feel the difference. If I give myself 30 minutes to get ready in the morning before I have to tend to kids or work, I feel very different than if I give myself an hour or if I give myself an hour and a half. And on some days, I do give myself 3 hours. And it's interesting to notice the difference
Mm.
and which one feels like the best. Sometimes
Wow.
I notice if I give myself a lot of time, too much time, I just get into this like low energy place. But I find that if there's a sweet spot,
No doubt.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. Yeah, it takes practice to learn what that sweet spot is. But
mm-hmm,
most certainly it is not harried on somebody else's schedule.
mm-hmm. Can you repeat that quote again? I want to see which words pop out to me.
Yes. If you want rest, you have to take it. You have to resist the lure of busyness. Make time for rest, take it seriously, and protect it from a world that is intent on stealing it.
So there's two phrases or two words that two sections that speak to me or like I feel something, which is the lure. I can't say that word properly. The lure of busyness. Like the first time I read that, I felt it. I'm like, I'm just so vulnerable to that. Like my whole life has been like, I can feel myself like pulled towards things that I think I should do, that I think need to be done. And I think for many decades, I was very susceptible to, like, I was just like blowing in the wind. If
Mm.
something should be done, that's where I go. Like, it's just an autopilot. And I've had to learn how to be very aware of what those things are that pull me away from rest.
Mm.
And they used to be like social interactions because I love people. If there was an invitation, it used to always be a yes. Yes, of course. I
Is there
would
any
never.
FOMO in there?
There was FOMO in there. I think they're bigger than FOMO for me was just I loved being around people.
Hmm.
It wasn't until much later that I recognized what that was. That was my coping mechanism. So for me, it wasn't drugs or alcohol, it was social interaction. Like that is what would help me feel happy. And that's what would help me not have to feel harder things. Is as
Yeah.
long as I kept busy and was with people having fun, then I don't have to feel any of those hard things in life and really look at things. So that would definitely be a lure. And I'd say yes, no question.
Makes a lot of sense that when that's taking up the everyday, then you get alone at night and you just want to be scrolling until you're too exhausted to keep your eyes open.
Because I didn't know how to be alone,
Yeah.
right? So all of a sudden the house is quiet. And like to some people, the house is quiet can seem like a very peaceful, relaxing, nice thing. And I'm like, no, that's not good. I would have the TV on all the time. I remember when I was younger, TV had to be on all the time. I didn't know
Yeah.
how to be with silence. And yeah, so I have to look at what are the things that pull me. The things that pull me away are this imagined to-do list, the shoulds, errands. I told you errands. There's an endless amount of errands, things to do around the house, things to go pick up this and pick up that. And I've been surprised at how much of a difference it makes in my life when I say no to errands. What
Mm.
I'm like, that doesn't need to be done right now. Or like this is going to sound so simple to some people, group them into one go.
Mm.
Pretty simple concept. But for me, it was like whichever I remembered that day would need to be done. And so like I'm always doing something.
Ah.
Yeah.
So it was almost like a category of chaos in your mind that you could dip into when you had a moment of maybe coming close to being alone so that you can grab from the goodie bag of errands and go busy yourself.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I could also be busy. I could be that busy person and,
Right.
feel like prideful about being busy, of a busy life. I'm important.
There's
I don't
so
know.
many. Think of the busy walking, the busy tone. You've described these things, the busy throwing things in a bag, the busy shower. Like bringing any attention to any of these areas is going to be so revealing. And we say we want peaceful lives, but the question really is, do we actually? Like, are we prepared for that? Our program is priming the body for peace specifically because we're not bloody prepared for that at all. We're in fact prepared for the exact opposite of what we claim to want most in our lives.
Yeah, I think there's like 4 things that I really practiced slowing down. One was washing dishes,
Mm-hmm.
one was walking, the other one was talking,
Mm-hmm.
and I think another one is like the way I put things it sounds weird, the way I put things in a bag. But
Super relatable.
they
Everyone is thinking about that right now.
of wow, the way I do all of those 4 things is like fast, 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 has to be fast.
Yeah.
And it would carry a certain energy. And like practicing slowing down those 4 things changed everything.
Yeah. It's the presence building muscles, you know?
Mhm.
Those can be primed in so many ways.
Mhm.
You can picture busy business people, talk, 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 rushing through the financial district, talk, 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 talk. Like there's a time in life where I remember that sort of looked cool and like purposeful. Now it just doesn't, you know? I don't have illusions about people just because they look a certain way means they're happy or fulfilled or, you know, whatever it is. Carrying
Yeah.
a briefcase makes me important. I just want people to bring some time and attention to whose timeline they're on,
Mhm.
if they wish to be on those timelines, if they need to be for some practical reason,
Yeah.
and how they want to feel in their lives.
Mhm. How do you want to feel and are you willing to protect that? Right? How do you want to feel? Are you actually comfortable feeling that? Do you
Mm-hmm.
allow for that feeling to exist in your life and for like how long? Right? If you desire to feel peace and calm, like, can you feel peace and calm for a minute, or is that too much already? Can you feel peace and calm for 15 minutes, an hour? And are you willing to protect it? Like, it wasn't until I learned how to be comfortable in peace and calm that I learned how delightful it felt. Once I recognized how delightful it felt, then I became protective. And I became
Mm-hmm.
protective by the choices I would make. Right. Well, I'm not going to do that extra errand because if I do, I'm going to run myself into that energy of rushed, and I don't want to feel rushed. And so I'll save that for another day. So I really practiced learning to be protective of that state of like peacefulness. But it
Mm-hmm.
took a lot of practice. It took a lot of intentionally. It took me actually sitting in the car, I remember, of the mall parking lot, like almost time to pick up my kids. And this is how my old brain used to work. Oh, I could fit in one last errand. I could just squeeze,
Mm-hmm.
make it work. I can make this work. And I'd be like the mental chatter. I can make it work. It'll be okay. And then when I decided to be more intentional about shifting these patterns, I would then ask myself, okay, play this forward. How will it feel to push and squeeze this errand in? How will it feel to do the errand? And then how will it feel the drive to pick up my kids? And how will it feel when my kids arrive and I see them? And I could just tell I'm going to be a total nasty bitch during the errand. And anyone walking not fast enough, like I'll be cursing them under my breath. And then I'll be like annoyed with anyone who's not driving the way I want them to drive on this like drive to pick up my kids, because now I'm like running late, and I will be feeling that gross sense of I'm running late. And then when I
Oof.
see my kids, I'm going to be all flustered. And I
Yeah.
had to practice playing that forward to then sit there and ask myself, is that how I want to feel? Is that how I want the next 25 minutes to feel? Or how would I feel if I just called it and we don't run any more errands now, and I drive peacefully now to pick up my kids, and I arrive with some extra time, and then, I'm like fully ready to see them when they arrive. Like, how would that feel? And I'm like, oh, I think that would feel much nicer.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I would make my choice based on body feeling and what I desire to feel versus in my mind what felt like the best decision and best choice and what I thought I should do. So
It's
that was
pretty
my
obvious when you say it out loud, right? The one feels really claustrophobic and the other feels really spacious.
but I didn't know that before because it wasn't
Yeah.
even a question. Be
Yeah.
like, well,
Wasn't
you
even a
have 5
question,
extra minutes. Why wouldn't you try to squeeze in another errand?
right?
Yeah.
This is making me think of artificial timelines we set for ourselves as well. Um, Kara, I remember actually doing this and actively working to undo this in her life. She used to make time promises. So, apropos of nothing, like, oh, I'll get this back to you in 5 minutes, or I'll respond tomorrow. And these are just tiny tweaks that we can make that are really practical, where you just remove those words and nobody cares or notices. You just say, I'll get back to you as soon as I can, which is very different than in 5 minutes. And it creates a whole dimension of relaxation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's big, right? The things that like nobody actually cares about, but you set it up for yourself. And like other people might not even notice. Maybe they do. And they're like, hey, she promised it to me in 5 minutes and she didn't get back to me, or she promised it today, but she didn't. I feel like sometimes people are so busy in their own stuff, they don't really, notice that stuff. But like for yourself though, when I've promised something in 5 minutes or when I promise something tomorrow, then I just have this dread this whole time, this like pressure of like, shit, I promised that thing. And like, when am I going to do that thing? And I still have to do that thing and I haven't done the thing. And what if I don't do the thing? And like, that's just
Totally self imposed. It's wild. We're absolutely wild. So many optional pressures.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's maybe one of the invitations is notice when you set yourself up for these promises that you don't actually need to. What would happen if you
Mm.
didn't put these time deadlines on there?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is this, the flip side is sometimes we're so conditioned to perform only when there's a time deadline
Mm.
that we think, well, if I don't put a time deadline, like, well, I'm never going to do it. And like that reminds me of we've been conditioned to perform only when there's stress and pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
we have come out of just trusting that like given my free will, this is still something I would do and want to do and put effort into.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to live like that.
No. Yeah, I don't want to live like that.
I don't want to say
I
yes to
won't.
things that, if given my free will, I would never say yes to. That sounds
Yeah.
horrible. Mhm.
So, like the quote says, you have to take the time. If you want the rest, you have to take the time to do it.
Mhm.
You can keep busy learning how to rest.
Yes. That's what I did until it
Right?
became habitual. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. She had the busyness muscles, so she put them to good use being busy learning how to slow down.
Mhm. They say take advantage of your strengths.
Yeah, totally. Amazing.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say before we go into a closing practice?
Mm. See if, we've shared so many body connection practices in the 30 something episodes of this podcast so far. See if you can take some of these and just insert them into your day and call them preventative rest, right?
Yeah.
Just build in 30 seconds of a different pace into your day, and that will change your life. You'll start to see you don't have to go at that go, go, go pace all the time, and things will start to feel different.
Yeah. And a beautiful, true inversion of that is that also the rest doesn't need to be complete deep sleep. It can be moments of mindfulness. It can be sitting quietly somewhere. These are all forms of rest that contribute to our overall system functioning.
I think one of the practices I'll walk people through in our live calls for priming the body for peace is one that I loved when I learned, oh, you mean I can just do a little bit of work and then rest? And then do a little bit of work and then rest? Like rest way earlier than I ever think I need to rest. That concept blew my mind. And so I'm excited that we'll get to practice that in priming the body for peace.
Right? Yeah, you just have more and better energy. We can run ourselves into the ground and still keep going, or we can take preventative rest and always have an abundant source of energy from which more and better energy flows.
I choose that one.
Yeah, right?
Option 2. Door
Yeah.
number 2, please.
Door number 2, indeed. Well, have you got closing practice in mind for our busy listeners?
Yes. I'm going to go with rocking, whether you want to rock side to side or front to back. And you're going to naturally find, I think, a pace that feels good. And then I want you intentionally to speed it up.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
Frantic, busy rocking.
And I want you to feel the difference. Feel how that feels in your body. And then again, let your body find the sweet spot. And just note for yourself when you found the sweet spot. When I do this with clients, I say, give me a sign when you found your sweet spot. And now I want you to intentionally slow it down, much slower. And notice how that feels. And now again, find your sweet spot.
Oh, that's interesting. I get this uncomfortable, it's like a specter crawling up my spine feeling when the rushed, busy, fast thing happens.
Mm-hmm.
Strange inversion of that with the too slow. It's like this almost like when I feel confused, like I don't know what's going on in the world around me. It's this like, what are we doing? Why? Slow. Very uncomfortable in a different way.
Yeah. So there you learned how to discern, like body wise, what feels uncomfortable, what feels comfortable, but also like see that there's like flavors of uncomfortable that are different.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like bringing in these kinds of practices because it helps people learn to find the sweet spot and feel the sweet spot. And also what's the other thing I like about it? I like that it's symbolic of pacing because we're so used to, like, if it was the world's pace or your boss's pace, what would it be? Right? Automatically like moving faster. And what's your pace? Right? And sometimes that might match, and sometimes you might notice there's a discrepancy. I want us to practice noticing, like, in this very moment, are you going through life at a pace that is at your sweet spot? Or are you following some other pace that you think you should or have to follow? Or are you just actually an autopilot and you don't even know whose pace you're following, but it sure isn't your sweet spot?
Yeah.
And the same as range of motion. When rocking, like, what's your sweet spot in the range of motion? And what would be like a larger range of motion? that like isn't quite your sweet spot. How does that feel?
Mm.
Right? And can you find your sweet spot again for range of motion?
Man, and this is a portable sweet spot that you've developed for me here right now. So this, if I'm experiencing some other discomfort in life, I know that if I go like this, I will be feeling a sweet spot. And I can bring that with me into really any interaction.
Yep.
Wild.
Pretty neat. Right? And then range of motion, you could like make it even smaller. What's the smallest range of motion of movement? Rocking. And how does that feel? And then another iteration of this is stay in that smallest iteration until you feel the pull to come out.
Mm.
Right? Instead of using my cue of when to come out, feel energetically when your body's like, get me out of here. I want a different range of motion. Right?
Magic.
And so all of a sudden, you're practicing how to be so much more in tune with what's true for you.
Mm.
And all we did was rock side to side.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for these gifts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're
Yeah.
welcome. We do
It just,
tons of this in priming the body for peace.
yeah,
Lots.
and it's so deeply related. You'll talk a lot about how does it seem like rocking back and forth doing this little silly movement would have anything to do with like the functioning of your life and relationships. And it is
Everything to do with it.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any last words?
No, just practice, have fun, discover.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you for being with us here. Thank you for doing these practices and bringing this out into your world. Please do like, follow, and subscribe. And if anything we've said here today has been helpful for you, please share it with somebody that you care about. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.